Yeah, this is a part of my work. I think a particular part of David Pellin's originality. And what it is, it's called conscious contribution and unconscious contribution. And what it does is make a distinction between that part of us that we can know directly and know directly that we're contributing to someone. It's stuff that we can know directly about ourselves. It's our authority. It's that which we make conscious contributions from our authority. Someone can know they're a good nurse, know they're a good teacher, know they're a good plumber, electrician. It's a part of us that we can be conscious of the contributions we're making to other people, and that gives us a lot of confidence. It gives us status. It can give other people confidence in us, that we are confident doing that. If someone's a United States Senator, they can be conscious that I'm a United States Senator and now I'm a candidate for Vice President of the United States. I'm Kamala Harris. This is my conscious contribution. Or, someone who's working to hold a classroom together in this particular time. I'm a good teacher. I've had this class before. I'm young and energetic about my kids. And I've got the skills to be a teacher, and I've got the skills to be an online teacher. That's all the sort of conscious contribution. But one of the things we're saying in Pellin is that is never all of who we are. There's a whole other part of who we are that we call the unconscious contribution. And that is where we're making very significant contributions to other people. And they pick them up, but in a sense, it is all both happening and needs to happen on an unconscious level. Examples are, and this has a lot of implications in families, in bringing up kids, has a lot of implications in my work. I'll touch on later how it also has implications in politics, which I was obviously touching on. In the unconscious contribution, mum or dad is making the contribution to the child, making the contributions of love, making the contributions of learning, the material I've touched on last briefly on Sunday, about foster kids, parenting and foster family. But in a ordinary nourishing family, which is a big deal in Pelham, because I take it, as I've said here before, I take a nourishing family as our basic metaphor, as our basic checking point. How would a nourishing family do this? Just to put that in a context, you know, Freud had sex as his basic metaphor. Carl Rogers has had how people relate to each other. Fritz Perls had how we take in physical nourishment. Jung and how we handle archetypes in human personality. In Pelham, we take a nourishing family. I don't want to go into it very much here, but partly because I feel there's an argument that someone like me could take that a nourishing family is I say nourishing because I'm not idealizing family. You know, evil can happen in families. You know, there is domestic violence, there is sexual abuse, there is child abuse. I don't deny that. And my background working with perpetrators of such crimes, I'm not romanticizing the family, but I am saying that the ordinary human family, when it's nourishing, is probably the best organization we've come up with so far. Because, you know, my take that we do not know how to govern ourselves and we're just adolescents, sort of overly fired up, uninformed adolescents in terms of how as a species we claim we know how to govern ourselves. That's a particular point of view of mine. And in a family, a whole lot of contributions are made, but they're not conscious, okay? And there are some things about the conscious contribution. Not only do we not know it when we're making it, but we need not to know it when we're making it. Because if we're conscious of it, it won't work. Pardon me. You know, the parent who goes around saying to themselves, pardon me, I'm a great parent. It's sort of not going to work. And it's in a certain sort of common sense understanding. I got one for, I got a late Christmas present from some of my grandkids the other day, very late Christmas present. But, you know, the world's greatest dad, the world's greatest mum, it's a certain sort of almost acknowledgement that mum and dad can't go around saying that. It won't work. And often as a parent, if well, I say to particularly to my in-laws, my two daughters-in-law and two sons-in-law, you know, I'm someone who comes in and say, hey, you're a really good parent. But you can't go around feeling you're a good parent. You've almost got to come back and say, oh yeah, but let me tell you how I blew it yesterday. You know, I really lost my rag. Whatever. There's just something about the naturalness, the spontaneity, the lightness, where a parent knows they have to be doing these things not in a conscious, deliberate way. It won't work. It's a particular place. One of the ways to see the difference between conscious and unconscious contribution a pediatrician can be a great pediatrician. Doesn't mean necessarily they're a great mum or dad. As a pediatrician, you're making, or as me, as a therapist, psychotherapist, or training foster care. You know, yeah, I got something to offer. You know, I can teach you this, I can teach you that, I can have these insights. When necessary, I can make those diagnoses. That would almost be a good example. Anyone in my field of work who, you know, knows the ropes will know that you do not go around applying those skills to your family. You do not go around diagnosing your family or friend. Stay away from that. And almost if someone did do that, particularly if they're fairly young in their career and they were doing that, a friend is going to take them to pieces, you know, or a big sister is going to take them to pieces, you know. And I guess the common sense would be, hey, don't bring that into the home, or don't bring that into when we're out together as a group of friends. You know. And, you know, as I said, if someone in my field, my field knows the rope, you almost know intuitively you don't do that. You don't go there. In a sense, the conscious contribution is a role, is a title, is a job title, is a title of qualification, and that needs not to be around. In the natural ebb and flow of intimacy, closeness, argument, conflict between close friends and between close family.
Peter, can you just say, in the light of our discussions about the community strand, where it feels like the kind of cloak of authority isn't quite as, you know, you haven't got the white coat of the doctor, say, just to summarize it in that.
Yeah.
Can you say how this fits with the community strand?
Yeah, well, I think the way it fits with the community strand, I mean, in a sense, the community strand is family in a way. And you can look at different community strands going back centuries. There's always a network that is like family, and you know, I think I can say, as the person who's come up with the concept of the two strands, I can say Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon and the offshoots are almost the fulfillment of the community strand. And there you get, I'll try and get at this, Mary. There you get a sense of, you know, what works is community, what works is sponsor. No, sponsor and community, they're the bits that work. And that is not denying the importance of 12 steps. And as you know, I'm an outsider to AA. I've seen it as, putting it simply, I saw it as an organization that did better things than any of us were doing. So I studied it. I'm an outsider too, I'm not an insider.
Well, also, the whole thing about sponsors is the language could really translate as, you must not be in the official strand. You know, it's not your job as a sponsor to advise and direct. Some do, and that's helpful for some people, but that's not the idea of it. The idea of it is sharing, you know, from the community heart, if you like. You share your experience, strength, and hope, and you don't direct or advise. So it's actual training in being in the community strand, not in the official strand.
Mm.
inside those 12-step programs themselves. It's very, very interesting, I think.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Supports us a great deal.
And leads. I mean, this is not for now, but just it does lead me to think. And yet, there's an authority in being a sponsor, and it's intrinsically different from the doctor's white coat. I do find the community in the official strands like very fascinating to think about.
Yeah, and again, I want to sort of say, over and over again, and I need to get some good visual aids. And Cynthia's help in getting stuff out and around. But this diagram, that we only have a tiny part of the whole truth, that diagram. In Pelham at its best, I feel refers to that a lot. Cynthia.
You're muted, darling.
Yes, I know. I couldn't, for some reason, my mouse wasn't moving properly.
Oh, right.
So I couldn't, so I had to do it on the touch screen. I was wondering something that might be, I wonder if this is an example of the conscious versus the unconscious contribution. My first astrology teacher was my mother, and one of the things that she taught me when working with clients and working with people is that there are times you have to put the chart down and just talk to somebody as a person, like particularly if you've got something like a death in the family or something like that. And that's a very clear thing that I remember, that, put the chart down, forget about astrology, and just talk. And I'm wondering if that's what that is about.
Oh, I think totally. And I have the same thing. Okay. And to tell a story about that in a moment, in a different way in a moment, but at times let go of all the tools. This is from a Pelham point of view. And just talk to someone. I even wrote a paper once, what's wrong with a heart-to-heart talk in the therapeutic relationship? An ordinary old heart-to-heart talk. And I think you're right. I think what that provides and what occurs in that moment is all the good stuff that is in the unconscious contribution. Because there's a whole lot of good stuff, caring life force good stuff, that's in the unconscious contribution. And in that point, that sort of comes to the fore. And I guess it is, and I do the same thing your mother said, and I've felt that for years. And one of the ways we see that in Pelham, the person has to become before the school of thought and practice. So the person has to come before the tools. And maybe someone comes and sees me or does Pelham and gets a lot out of it, and never particularly gets into the tool. Never gets into the structure of it. The conscious contribution always has a structure, and the unconscious contribution has to be unstructured. I mean, you have some structure. You have bedtimes, you have meal times, and they have to sit there and have their meal, and they have to go to bed in bedtime. But then around that, you got all sorts of stuff. And also, I guess, when a nourishing family with small children is working well, there's all sorts of stuff that surrounds, rituals of bedtime, rituals of mealtime, little in-jokes in the family that are the unconscious contribution. And it's quite hard one to get a head around. The unconscious contribution is extraordinarily powerful. I mean, it literally makes a difference between a good parent and a bad parent, makes a difference between a good therapist and a bad therapist. It's taking it out of what foster, and you know, this concept of conscious and unconscious contribution, and as I stumble over the words, it's one of the things I want to say. It is a bit sort of klutzy, you know, it's a bit sort of heavy and jargony, and conscious contribution and unconscious contribution. But, you know, at times I can feel it can almost have a little blah, blah, blah quality. But the other thing I found is it's simply extraordinarily useful. Because, for one thing, it can look at how some absolutely fundamental things work, like love, like beauty. Someone who is beautiful and goes around consciously being beautiful will end up not being as beautiful as if they are unconscious about it. And that's just true. And something similarly is true of wisdom. And I think it's something where gurus and spiritual leaders have a bit of a hard time, I would say, because some of it just needs to be, if someone goes around being wise, they're a bore. And you know, the person who is most beautiful, the person who is most wise will say, I'm not. And yet they are. It's very subtle stuff, very, very subtle stuff. Of course, on another level, the beautiful person knows she's beautiful, or the wise person knows she's wise. Just the same as the parent, in a sense, there is no doubt that on a daily basis, they are deliberate about what will be good for the kids. But it's an unconscious contribution. I guess one of the ways to see it clearly, if all of a sudden it doesn't work, intimacy, making love, you know, that needs to be sort of unconscious and flow and easy and almost not a big deal to be a very big deal. That's the nature of the unconscious contribution. That if it's really not working for a couple, then all of this has to be made conscious in terms of other parts of, and this is where it does get a bit clunky, but it's true. You know, how does a couple make their sexual life an accepted effort? Now, as I said, the words are a bit clunky, you know, but that's sort of what needs to happen. And a whole lot of very good sex therapy, that's what it is. You know, bring in candles and champagne and, you know, make it and go slow. You know, and go very slow. And bring in gimmicks, you know, be imaginative, be creative, and go slow. Yeah, Cynthia.
Something else I thought of back when I was a lawyer and I was a divorce lawyer, we would talk about when I would work with people about doing the joint parenting agreements. And one of the things that I said, and it was a common thing, is like, okay, if everything's going, because people get all hung up about them and stuff, I said, if everything's going well between you and you're agreeing with each other and you're able to co-parent well, you put that joint parent agreement in the desk and don't even worry about it. You only pull it out if you're having a disagreement, and that's when you pull it out.
Yeah. And that's a really good example of the conscious and unconscious contribution. because whatever's gone on, and as you know, I've been there and around my kids, you know, we know we got to do well by the kids. I mean, you know, we've messed up, but we can't pass that on to them, putting it crudely. And then you've got the agreement. But if you can work well without the agreement, okay, might be breaking the agreement, breaking the rules, maybe even yelling at each other once or twice, but it's working for the kids. It's working for the kids because it's real, and it's working for the kids because it's got a grounding in love and security, and the parents won't take for granted in the situation of divorce, particularly soon after divorce. That's where, you know, you've got to put in this stuff. You know your dad's thinking about you, you know your dad loves you, you know, send your dad a birthday card, whatever, you know, let's call your dad on Zoom, whatever, however it's done. But if that's sort of tight, like a conscious contribution, well, this is what I should do for my child. I should make sure my child has, even though I hate him, has a good relationship with her father. It's going to burden the child. Okay, it's got to be loose. It's you know, maybe I hate him, but that's irrelevant. You know, why don't we call you Dad? You know, it's the looseness within. In another part of my work, which I will touch on, I call it the therapeutic touch. I'll mention that in a minute, but just staying on this, there has to be that looseness to it. And within that, there has to be, I am not conscious of the contribution I'm making, because if I am conscious of the contribution I'm making, I'll lose something. Now, you know, I think it's not that mysterious. I think a person in sports over time is just making the strokes. They're not thinking of the meaning of each stroke. It's got to be, they'll have some game plan going on, but in another way. Yeah, Elizabeth.
So one thing I'm thinking about is the unconscious contribution that people make to other people, not necessarily in a deep relationship like a romantic partner or parent and child or therapist and client, but in very casual relationships and even with strangers. I know that before the pandemic, my husband used to get a lot of nourishment from riding the bus and just talking to different people. And that, you know, that's very much a way we unconsciously contribute to each other. And a big part of the problem with the isolating aspects of the pandemic is that people have to make a lot of those contributions to each other's social well-being on purpose. And as you said, it loses some of the effect that way, that people aren't making those unconscious contributions to just a whole bunch of people around them, and then they're not getting those contributions. And people are suffering for it.
Yeah.
So that's the thought I had.
No, I think that's absolutely true, because I think a lot of a lot of that which helps us get through life on a day-to-day basis at times is unconscious contributions that from people who perhaps aren't very important to us, but they penetrate. You know, someone saying, you know, I'm good to see you, good to see you, or even now at times, Italians are good at this. Italians are good at unconscious contribution. And even now at times, I'll sort of grab my cheek and say, bello, okay? Giovane, you know, you beautiful young man. I mean, you know, come on. But it sort of happens, and you know, a hand on a shoulder, or yeah, and I think it goes two ways: the person receiving the unconscious contribution and the person delivering it. And we, you know, as you know, I like the cliches of common sense because I think there's a lot in them. And there's a statement for it, isn't it? Oh, it made my day. You know, it made my day that someone took time to, oh, you need help. At my age, that's the other thing you get. You need help, you know. Like, and it's
And to
just
get political about it, the other thing is, you know, when they ask in the government, why should we support people who aren't working? Why should we provide access to people who don't have it to the same degree an able-bodied person would? The answer is the unconscious contribution.
well,
We matter to each other in ways we cannot articulate.
Yeah.
And that's all about the unconscious contribution. And, you know, from a strictly selfish political point of view, that's why it's necessary.
what's
all.
that there? Just spell that one out a bit with a little more detail.
That is providing a social safety net for people who cannot financially provide for themselves.
And
it's because those people matter.
Yeah, it's a place where once we get into the unconscious contribution, it's got a lot of, I think it's got a lot of cool answers in it. Because here in England, we have the NHS, the National Health Service, and it's a national treasure. It is criticized vehemently on a daily basis. You know, everything that's wrong with it. It'd be like, you know, in a nourishing family, you know, you've got no idea how much I hate my older brother. Okay, whatever. But I think there's an unconscious contribution in the country that is there. If I get sick, I might gripe about the waiting list, or I might gripe about the particular hospital, but I have no financial worries. There are no financial worries at all. And I think on a social level, societal level, political level, that's the same as what you're saying about the safety net. You shouldn't have to question if the safety net's there. You shouldn't, of course you shouldn't, something I came across recently, you know, a very established man, to use that expression. His daughter who was 7 or 8, there was something called Funtown, and she wanted to go to Funtown, and she's 8 years old. And Martin Luther King had to tell his daughter she could not go to Funtown, okay? And he had to explain why, and that was the first time he told his eldest child about what racism meant. Because she'd seen it on television, and she was jumping up and down. Everyone's going to Funtown. So something we almost sort of take for granted, right? I mean, the only thing is, oh, don't nag me about that. Yes, I'll take you soon, or whatever. Promise, Dad, promise, promise, promise. But now, all of a sudden, that a child can go to a playground, that a child can go to this equivalent of Disneyland, I guess, or something like that. That's what this Funtown was a sort of something equivalent to what is now Disneyland in Atlanta. And no, it couldn't take for granted. So I think there is a lot in our society that is the unconscious contribution. And then you've got the other side of it. Because we're talking here about the positive side of the unconscious contribution, but there's the negative side of the unconscious contribution. You know, let's hate, okay? Whether it's in the 1930s in Germany or some other contemporary society. Yeah, the whole unconscious, Mary.
Well, I was having a thought last night, and I don't know if it's connected with this, but I wonder if it is. And I'm trying to work with confidentiality to know what to say, but
Change sex and names.
well,
Really? I'll tell you how to handle, it's a little training trick. Handle confidentially, change the sex, change the names, change the occupation. You can always do it.
Okay. Well, I was in a conversation where some people were saying that if people were Trump supporters, they had to decide not to have a relationship with them or not to talk to them. And I couldn't help thinking about I think I heard this through you, and it was talking about the past, but or not just the past. I think it continued into the present. But in Italy, you would have fascists and communists at the same dinner table, and they would fight furiously, and then they just go back to being family. And somehow we don't seem to be able to do that in America or Britain in the same way. And I just wondered, is there any connection between conscious and unconscious contribution there?
Well, once again, methodologically, you know, we say they're tools, okay? So can I use this tool in this situation? Right. And I think you can, because if, and who knows, because that's, you know, that a little bit is idealizing the Italian family. And I know Italy well enough. I'm the last person in the world to do that. I know families who, sisters, who literally, small hill town, pass each other in the street, probably 4 or 5 times a day, and haven't talked to each other for 40 years. So so I know the dark side of Italy, and I know the dark side of the Italian family, as much as I adore the country, there's no question. But I think if you take that in, it's almost so there will have been times when that could not have happened, because the fascist person killed, 4 people in the village yesterday because he's a fascist cop. So that's not the family is going to split over something like that. Okay, but take it in a more general way. When there's not murder around, we're just voting. Yeah, I think I would sort of say it's useful to see the eroding of the unconscious contribution, because if you take the unconscious contribution and as I've said here before, some of my perspective is an evolutionary one, going back a very, very long time. So the unconscious contributions in the family are holding that family together over generations that we can't even count, And that's why we're here today, because all that's happened. And so I think it is useful, what is the unconscious contribution? We can't get into here. And, again, it's one of those cliches, blood is thicker than water, and you are my brother, you are my son, well, you are my father. So I think it is the unconscious contribution that is very, very powerful. And I think it's useful. Yeah, Cynthia.
Well, I was thinking also some things in politics when Elizabeth was talking. I was thinking about
Gone a
one
little
more.
bit quiet
Oh,
somehow.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking about politics a bit, and one of the things I think that good politicians do is sort of intentionally do unconscious contribution things that will invoke a feeling that there's an unconscious contribution. Like I'm thinking about President Obama. One of the things that I know that he did, which made, well, two things that made a huge difference, and actually why I got excited about him. One is that he campaigned in every state, regardless of whether or not that state was solidly for him, solidly against him, and whether or not it made a difference. And that, because I'm in Illinois, and Illinois is generally, it is assumed to go Democrat. So a lot of times presidents don't bother. But the fact that he bothered to campaign in Illinois, the fact that he bothered to campaign in every single state, I think made people feel like they were cared about. And also the fact that he intentionally Miss Biden, Vice President Biden's doing that too, where he's unconsciously seeking out donations of $5 and $10 and saying that these are donations, and might not make a difference in the bucket, but it really makes people feel like a part of it, even if. And I think that's one of the big mistakes that Hillary Clinton made, was that she did not campaign in Wisconsin and Michigan. And I think her not doing that made a difference. I mean, and maybe it's just Midwest. Maybe it's just this is the area of the country where we see things like that.
No, I think putting it there, because the main thing I want to say about the unconscious contribution is Kamala Harris's shoes. Okay, and the way Kamala Harris, walks off an airplane and then across the tarmac to a car. I look as though I'm going to be the president, okay? And I've got my sneakers on. I've got my, I don't remember all the precise American names for those shoes, but she's done it twice. She's done it with I think they're Timberlands, and she's done it with the sneakers. And they've been, what's come out, they've been in her wardrobe forever, just forever. But on the other hand, there's a certain sort of unconscious contribution. And again, she can't be conscious of it. If she's conscious, I'm walking off this plane like a president walks off a plane. or a vice president walks off a plane, it'll go, but she's not conscious of it. And I think Hillary really lacked something there. She couldn't get it across. What's on that almost unconscious contribution level? You can trust me and I care about you. And I think both those things are true. You know, we could have trusted her and she sure as hell would have cared about us right now. You know, I think that's almost, you could just make that case a bit historically, but she couldn't get it across. And that's the unconscious contribution, being able to get it across. I mean, yeah, Mary.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I keep thinking about this one particular thing very, very, very early on in Pelin, when I was completely, and I don't know if it's relevant, that's why I've been not wondering whether to say it, but very, very early on, I was helped to understand that my caring life force was really frozen, and which I wasn't aware of. And I remember this one group where it almost makes me want to cry. Poor me then. I wanted to be kind to somebody and say something warm. And I said to you, did that come across okay, Peter? Because I felt so conscious saying it. And you said, it's okay, you're practicing or something like that. But it was like, I was so out of touch with my caring life force that it was like, to say anything from it was this really conscious thing, and it felt weird because it's something we should be, and but it become unconscious.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of Pelham work over time is, and thank you for that, Mary, for all of us has been sort of practicing with good bits of us that we can't quite access and get at, but they are in us, okay? And I would sort of use this in a political context because I don't know, no, I certainly don't have all the answers. It's something like being able to come from yourself with a certain confidence, okay? That's not quite sufficient analysis.
I just wanted to add that, you know, when now at this, you know, in the last 5 or 10 years of my life, people have wanted to be friends with me because it was always felt like the other way around. And so I get feedback about, you know, you're always warm, or you're always ready to listen, or you're always kind, or something like that. And I still get a surprise because you kind of hold on to these early images of inadequacies somehow.
Yeah. And there's a certain place where we need to be a little bit awkward, a little bit not sure about the unconscious contribution. So we do have a little bit of trouble with the compliment. Well, it wasn't that great. And I think that's a place where you can see the clear difference with the conscious contribution. You know, the conscious contribution is getting the award, getting the Oscar, you know, winning Wimbledon, you know, or, you know, getting a promotion at work, realizing the class has said you're a good teacher and absolutely taking it in. There'll be a little bit there. Someone who's a really great teacher will have a combination of both, okay? But the bit of it that someone gets the award of the best teacher of the year, yeah, you know, don't apologize for that. You know, thank you very much. I know I'm pretty good. Almost, you know. But the unconscious contribution is a little more subtle, a little more delicate, extraordinarily powerful. You can almost see both things there, which is one of my favorite bits on YouTube. Well, two of my favorite bits on YouTube, and I guess, you know, we don't have 30 people, so I can be pretty straightforward about my politics. You know, when Barack sang Amazing Grace, you know, in the eulogy for the people who had been killed in the church shooting, it had almost an ideal combination of both. It was a surprise. You know, it could have maybe flopped, bit of a risk, and it was superb. Because I think it had underneath, and the unconscious contributions a bit difficult because you need not to put words on it, because if you put words on it, you know, it sounds a bit sappy. And that's where the, you know, thing to the, where the metaphor and analogy to a family is useful. Because, you know, the teenager comes in, or the pre-teenager comes in and tells mom and dad how great they are. Well, yeah, you sort of love it, and at the same time, oh, you give them a cuddle, but, you know, I wish I could have been better, sort of goes through your mind. It's a particular moment, a treasured moment, but it's got those two qualities to it.
I was thinking of that time when a little boy wanted to touch his hair and feel the
Yes,
farmer's
yes.
hair.
Yeah.
That's a good example of it, isn't it?
And the other one is, which I think is going to go down powerful, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's statement in the House about the guy who swore about her, that had both in it. I mean, young as though she is, she's a superb politician with all the conscious contributions that a superb politician need to have. You know, thank you, buddy. You have given me an opening and I'm going to take it. And I'm so good at my job of being a politician, I will look very elegant in taking it. And she did. She did all that, no question. She did it very, very well. But it was calculating, you know. He blew it. She rubbed his nose in it, in my view. But underneath that, I think the way that will go down in history, underneath that, there was something else. And, you know, someone like me, or a political journalist, you know, could analyze what it was, what it is.
Well, I did a bit in one of the essays, chapters I wrote from my husband, about my husband, because I was talking about the end of her apology. She said, sorry, the end of her reply to the way that the, forget his name, Yoho, or whatever it was. Yeah, Yoho, apologized. She said, you know, I was just, you know, I've been called names before. I've worked in working class jobs. And at the end, she said, I was just going to pack up and go home for the day. What was that very last sentence? I've gone and forgotten it now. Anyway, she changed her mind. So for me, the unconscious contribution was she was talking to any and pretty much all women who've had that kind of male assumption that they can be rude and nasty and even violent. And it's just so much part of our everyday experience. We're not used to a woman pointing it out, but it's there as our everyday experience.
Yes.
I don't know if I explained that very well, but
No, you've got it. Yeah, Cynthia.
I was just thinking about the late Justin Skinberg, who I mean, she did a lot of amazing conscious contributions, but I was also thinking about just the fact of her being a mother, being a mother through law school, all the things that she did, not being able to get a job and still moving forward, and you know, her unconscious contributions are almost. I mean, just
Yeah.
her conscious ones just are like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking of something in terms of the maybe the relationship and the tool of transparency. And I was thinking about transparency could be a way of kind of mining unconscious contributions by just telling your story. Yeah, I was thinking in terms of her too. Like her story is just so powerful, and
Yeah.
so you know, and just well, and even like little things like the fact that she had these beautiful in terms of not just the male masculine way of having power, but also some very feminine things. Like she never really lost that. I mean, her beautiful collars that she wore, and her specific, you know, descent collar and her majority opinion collar, and just sort of saying that, you know, you can be tough, you can be very strong, but you can also be very feminine too, and
Yeah.
you don't have to
Yeah.
lose that.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you know, to sort of take it, you know, the Greeks say character is destiny, and I guess a lot of our character is tied up. A lot of our character comes through in the unconscious contribution, and we can't sort of force it. It's not going to work. You know, it's the power of authenticity. And I guess in many ways it is at its best, and you know, as a school of thought and practice that's been around a long time, you know, I think we need to be bold. But I think the unconscious contribution is a reflection of our soul, is a reflection of our love and what our love's about. Just on the other side, it can be a reflection of someone's evil. Yeah, there were unconscious contributions that Hitler made that simply, you know, triggered off hate and murder are all right. No, he sort of communicated that. And it didn't matter what the policies were, and it's sort of history that he didn't quite have to lay out the Holocaust, and he was rather afraid to lay it out because he might be held responsible. But everyone knew what he wanted. Okay, everyone knew that he wanted that, and then he convinced them of wanting that, which is a bit sort of chilling. And that's where I think it's important that we can balance it with these other positive sides of it. I mean, if you read about Lincoln, his unconscious contributions were all over the place in the sense of very, very present. I don't mean all over the place in the sense of being disorganized. I'm being very, very present. You know, and he'd tell these dumb jokes in the middle of terrible figures about, you know, men killed in war. Well, as the preacher said to the widow, and, you know, go off on something that somehow or other conveyed, I don't know what it conveyed. I'm joined with you. I'm this guy who's, you know, literally commander-in-chief, to use that phrase. But at the same time, you know, I'm with you, and I can tell this dumb joke, and you can all groan Um, just something about that, something about that. So I think there is something that the unconscious contribution does carry our transparency, or our transparency carries the unconscious contribution. I'm not sure which it is. Just to bring it down to my work, which, you know, I know best. I know my work better than I know a bunch of other things. But in training therapists, I, you know, often said, amongst other things, there are three things you need to have: accuracy, the caring life force, which we've covered here. But the other one is what I call in that situation therapeutic touch. And what therapeutic, and within that, it's a bit technical and, you know, be around when we go on to the online training. But what I'm saying in there, accuracy and caring life force in themselves are not enough. Someone has to feel your caring. And I've gone through times when, you know, people who know me very well, you know, I can look distracted. I can look as though I'm not there. You know, as Mary knows, I used to be chronically late. And people think, yeah, okay. You know, he says he cares about me, but is he really there for me? And that's why I developed this concept of therapeutic touch. And again, you get it in a family. Oh, well, you know, your dad loves you. Look at all the things your dad does for you. But what we're saying here, that's not enough. The child has to feel the father's love. And a lot of children, even in my nourishing family, grow up not feeling their father's love. And in that sense, not quite believing in it. For whatever reason.
Oops. I was found myself thinking about when I went with my friend to a hospital here where the language was Spanish, and the doctors seemed very young. And I said, and we saw two different lots of doctors, and I said, well, you know, we did some research on the web and checked it out with a doctor in LA. So I knew I was going to like a reputable doctor, right? So I knew the person had the official authority. And I said, well, let's see what the feel of them is. Because the first doctor, you know, walked in, we just liked him straight away, really felt he cared about my friend, but included me in the warmth, you know. And he recommended another doctor, and then that doctor couldn't see us. So we were going to see this perhaps junior doctor. And I said the same thing. I said, well, let's see if it feels like he cares about us. And it really did. So I never even gave a thought to the doctor we'd been initially recommended, who was probably more senior, because we felt this person was going to look after our interests.
Yeah.
And that's all unconscious contribution, right?
Yeah, and that's all unconscious contribution. And, you know, in a whole lot of areas, professional areas, the unconscious contribution is really important, because the unconscious contribution will almost always be some form of callous, okay? Let me just spell that out. If you remember material on callousing, so professionals are surrounded by a great deal of hurt. And because of the hurt they have, they are surrounded by, to cope with their job, then develop calluses. Doctors, surgeons are surrounded by a great deal of hurt. So they develop a callus which starts off as being sort of distant. bit distant, bit removed, because all they can do is the one specific thing that they can do, the one operation they can carry out. They can't take on all the pain that's around that from their patient and their patient's family. So they have that point of removedness, so they can concentrate on what they do. But if they're not careful, that point of removedness becomes arrogant. And so many surgeons are arrogant. Divorce lawyers, of which I'm sadly something of an expert, they're surrounded with a lot of hurt, a lot of hurt, a lot of chaos, a lot of hurt in the chaos. And they've only got one bit to do, work out the legal end, what is going to be the legal resolution of this situation, because somehow or other there's going to be a legal resolution. That's all they can concentrate on. They can't take it over. So in my experience, divorce lawyers develop a certain sort of humor, jokes. They make them amongst themselves. To the client, they're just killing. Okay? But that's a callous they develop. The first stage of it, it's just being a little light, because this couple are going through this. So that, again, they've got a certain amount of removedness and a certain amount of lightness in it all. At that time, the callus is useful, like the surgeon's callus of being a bit remote is useful, because they can laser beam concentrate on that which is their responsibility. But the lightness becomes this humor, which becomes a certain sort of slick humor, and which is just a killer.
Are you saying that the callus undermines the unconscious contribution, or that we get the callus as an unconscious contribution?
No, what I'm saying here, the callus ends up being an unconscious contribution. The surgeon is not arrogant. The divorce lawyer is not slick, but they come across that way. Just the same as we're looking at people who come across as someone we could trust politically.
Because I think we can make the sense that contribution is a positive mistake. The contribution is a positive word. You're using it in a more emotional, neutral way, isn't that? What adds to the situation, whether good or bad.
What I'm saying is, because yes, mainly we look at the positive side of it, but conscious contribution and unconscious contribution are tools that can also be applied with some depth and subtlety and practicality to horrendous situations as well. A demagogic politician conveys all sorts of messages and gets cult of personality.
I'm thinking also of when I worked in the D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Center, and the clients would say they knew immediately when a psychiatrist couldn't care about them at all and just saw them as a label. That's an unconscious contribution too.
Oh yes, and foster carers who have to work with social workers, and as you know, I've been a social worker. They have a way of saying it, miss by the book, or Mr. by the book, and they absolutely know what they're talking about. Someone who doesn't see them as a person, but just sees them of a form to fill in, essentially. And the unconscious contribution in fostering from a social work professional's or trainer side, my side, is being able to sit down with someone at the kitchen table and just be there and listen. And foster carers just absolutely love that.
So just this is the theoretical point. So in a sense, there's a relationship between how the unconscious contribution and self-identity and persona gap, right? That's
Yeah,
some of
yeah.
the material for it.
Yeah, for the future, that's where some of these tools overlap. Tamar, do you want to come in at all? We don't know each other, so I guess I'm a little shy to ask you if you want to say anything.
Hi.
And that's not fair.
I, at the beginning of this conversation, was somewhere else when thinking about the community strand and the unconscious contributions, positive and negative, because I just came from a silent meditation retreat that was a definite school of, like, I think it was Hindi Christian or something. And I'm concerned very often when people pay their way in terms of being of service, and then when there's more of a family kind of setup, I start to get my cult antenna.
Mm.
I start to freak out because I actually do feel like I'm in my family of origin, which was more cult with my father. It was kind of, sometimes families can be cults, and the unspoken ways of managing people with rules that hold people really tight and are unspoken. And I feel like there's a very high price to pay sometimes when there's the community strand and the unconscious contributions that are, it feels like it can be, everybody can regress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think so. I think that, I talk about tools, and, I talk about simple tools, and I talk about Michelangelo's simple tools, which I ask people to Google. That's just something I do, and just sharing that with you briefly. But, you can use a hammer and chisel, to create something beautiful, or you can use a hammer and chisel to kill somebody.
Yeah.
And I think the bit you're touching on, which I've seen a lot, and where those things come together, it's almost I guess what we'd say here, that at times the unconscious contribution simply's got to be opened up, right? It's got to be sort of open, not even using my word transparent.
Yeah.
Going back to just common sense and, heart-to-heart talk in a therapeutic relationship, sort of heart-to-heart talk with someone who seemed to be setting up, I call it cult of personality. And at another place, just to tell you, because I'm a bit proud of this one. David Pellin was very concerned about that. He was surrounded by a lot of young people. And other people have heard me tell this story, but he was a very sort of plain, ordinary man in a way. But there was always a pile. He used to wear white shirts. There was always a pile of white laundered shirts, okay? It was a bit messy. So someone could go up to him and quietly say, David, you need to change your shirt because you spilled coffee on it. And my view is, he did it deliberately, okay? He wasn't going to have these kids set him up as some sort of guru.
Right.
And I think those things are very concerning. And in Pelham, it comes down to evaluating in terms of hurt and purpose. I mean, that's the tool we bring in heavily there. But from it's lovely for me you're in San Francisco because you know, Vancouver's only up the coast, okay, and you know, all the San Francisco influences on me. You know, Alan Watts, Fritz Perls, Essler, Synanon. You know,
I worked for the next incarnation of Synanon as Walden House, and I've been in Fritz Perl's house on Esalen, and it does have because there was always this mess. There was always the comfort of there being some kind of a mess that was up and being worked and processed. But at Walden House, literally, I had to say, you know, on the speaker, "Good morning, family," and everyone was a family. So, you know, that thing about, and it was shut down again, you know, by the CIA. I mean, Walden House and Synanon, and there were very good things happening, but the question of power and abuses of power and hierarchy, when there isn't a clear profit or an understanding of how we're all contributing to, you know, the big buck, then there's personality that becomes concerning.
Just to share with you what you said, and you know, other people know, I for years, decades, you know, I use Lord Acton routinely. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And a therapist can have a lot of power. And we need to look at what we do with that. And someone who is, you know, handling any sort of therapeutic movement, has to look at the power in it. Now, I think Perls and Carl Rogers both did. But some didn't. I would criticize Freud that he didn't look at them. And, you know, the bit I say, oh, I'm a psychotherapist, so that doesn't apply to me. Okay, well, that doesn't work. And we can have a lot of power, and it can corrupt us. And I think that to me is, I don't know nearly as much as you do. But that to me is what happened to the original Synanon. Just to share, and the Dietrich and all that, and just to share with you, going back, you know, we brought Synanon to Vancouver. Okay?
I didn't know.
I remember it was called Ex-Calais. Which is a indigenous people word. I can't remember what it meant. It was a long time ago. So it's very nice we share those roots. Thank you.
And you know, this is the birthplace of I mean, cults, you know, in the 70s, and it's also a theme. And there's some cults in my family. I'm from Toronto originally. I'm Canadian. So the community strand, and then the fear of cult.
Where are you from? You said you're from originally?
Toronto.
Toronto. Okay. I've got family in Ottawa.
In Ottawa.
Right
on. So I got that. I have an English strand.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we'll end there. And we end by going around and each of us saying our name and where we're located. I must admit, I do like that. I think grounds us in a bit of reality or something. And yeah, I'm Peter, and I'm in King's Lynn in England. And yeah, thank you for coming today.
I'm Tamara in San Francisco,
Okay.
and I'm glad I'm here.
Cynthia?
I'm Cynthia. I'm in Kankakee, Illinois, and I really enjoyed today. It put a lot of it's nice sometimes to have language about something that you kind of always sort of felt was there, but it's nice to have like words to actually describe them. So I like that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because that's something I've said about Pelham for a long, long time. And I certainly say it to the foster carers. I'm not really teaching you anything new, but what I'm giving you is a different framework, a different structure, maybe some different words to put around what you already know, I guess, that way. Thanks.
Right.
Elizabeth?
I'm Elizabeth. I'm in Eugene, Oregon. Thanks.
Yeah. Mary?
I'm Mary. I'm in Rosarito Beach, Mexico. And what you just said, Peter, is one of my really favorite things about contribution training. It's one of the harder things to convey to people, I think. We're not come up with all these fancy ideas, out of our own clever mind. We're putting words to things people already know that help them when they know it consciously. But it truly is one of my favorite things about contribution training. And just can you and I meet at 12:15, Peter?
Yep.
Okay. You always dash away, so I can't arrange it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Thanks for
Bye.
coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.